My name is Ethan, and I just turned 30 last month. I thought I had it all figured out. Great tech career, my own home, and a loving girlfriend. Growing up, birthdays were sacred in our family. At least that is what I believed until my 30th, when my parents handed my gift to my younger brother Jacob and uttered words that shattered my world. "You do not deserve anything." I maintained my composure, but that night changed everything. Before I dive into how my own family betrayed me on what should have been a celebration, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to hear how I turned this heartbreak into the best decision of my life. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in Connecticut, in a house with a white picket fence and family photos lining every wall. My earliest memories are mostly happy ones. Weekend barbecues in the summer Christmas mornings, filled with laughter and parents who seemed to love both their sons equally. My brother Jacob is 2 years younger than me, and when we were very young, we were inseparable. We shared a bedroom until I was 10, built elaborate forts in the backyard, and defended each other from neighborhood bullies. Those were the golden days before the cracks in our family foundation began to show. The shift happened gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Jacob showed exceptional athletic ability around age 8. He could throw a baseball with surprising accuracy and run faster than kids 2 grades above him. My parents, especially my father Robert, who had been a college baseball player with unfulfilled professional dreams, took immediate notice. "That arm is something special," Dad would say, beaming with pride during Jacob's Little League games. "He gets that from my side of the family." Meanwhile, I was the kid who preferred to take apart our home computer to see how it worked rather than play sports. I was fascinated by technology from an early age, spending hours in my room programming simple games on our family's first desktop computer. "Ethan, you should go outside more," my mother Diana would say, shaking her head as she found me hunched over a keyboard. "It is not healthy to stare at screens all day." When I tried to show them a simple program I had written at 12 years old, my father glanced at it disinterestedly. "That is nice, son, but we need to get to Jacob's game. He is pitching today." The pattern became clearer as we entered our teenage years. Jacob's room gradually filled with trophies, while my academic achievements received passing acknowledgement. When I won the state science fair at 14 with a computer program that could solve complex math equations, my parents attended the ceremony but left early because Jacob had baseball practice. Birthdays became another measuring stick of the disparity. On my 16th birthday, I received a second-hand laptop. 2 months later, on Jacob's 14th birthday, he got a brand new bike and an expensive baseball glove signed by a professional player. The difference in enthusiasm was palpable. Jacob needs proper equipment to develop his talent. My father explained when I questioned the disparity. "You should understand that, Ethan. You are the smart one, right?" That backhanded compliment became a pattern. My intelligence was acknowledged but somehow used against me, as if being smart meant I should require less support, less encouragement, and fewer resources. Despite this, I excelled academically. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school and earned a full scholarship to MIT for computer science. The day my acceptance letter arrived, I rushed home bursting with excitement. "That is great, honey," my mother said, giving me a quick hug before returning to preparing dinner. "You have always been so independent." My father nodded. "Good job. I knew you would get in somewhere good." That same evening, the conversation quickly turned to Jacob's upcoming baseball tournament with detailed discussions about travel arrangements and who would record his games. College widened the gap even further. While I worked part-time jobs to cover expenses not included in my scholarship, my parents paid for Jacob's entire education at a state university where he had received a partial athletic scholarship. When his grades slipped, they hired tutors. When he wanted to study abroad for a semester, they covered the costs. Meanwhile, when my computer crashed during my junior year and I called home to see if they could help with the $800 replacement I desperately needed for my coursework, my father said, "You need to learn to budget better. Ethan, we cannot bail you out every time you have a problem." I ended up taking extra shifts at the campus tech support desk and eating ramen for weeks to afford the new computer. During college breaks, when I returned home, the disparity was even more apparent. Jacob's achievements were displayed prominently. New trophies framed newspaper clippings about his games, photos of him with his teammates. My academic awards were either tucked away in a drawer or displayed in less prominent locations. Despite all this, I held on to hope that eventually my parents would recognize my worth. I continued to seek their approval, calling home regularly with updates about my classes and internships. Their responses were always polite but brief, usually followed by extended updates about Jacob. "That is nice, Ethan," my mother would say after I told her about making the dean's list for the 4th consecutive semester. "Did you hear Jacob might get scouted by a minor league team?" The pattern continued, and a quiet resentment grew inside me. But so did my determination to succeed on my own terms. If I could not earn their unconditional love and respect through my achievements, I would build a life so fulfilling that their approval would no longer matter. But deep down, that little boy who just wanted his parents to be proud still existed, still hoped for the day when they would finally see him. After graduating summa cum laude from MIT, I landed a job at Tech Future, a growing software company in Boston. Starting as a junior developer, I quickly distinguished myself by solving problems other team members found insurmountable. My innovative approaches to coding challenges caught the attention of senior management, and within 3 years, I had been promoted twice. Harrison Fleming, the chief technology officer, became something of a mentor to me. Unlike my parents, Harrison recognized and nurtured my talent. He was a straight-talking, silver-haired veteran of the tech industry who had built and sold 2 companies before joining Tech Future. "You have got something special," Ethan Harrison told me, after I debugged a critical system issue that had stumped the entire team. "I see a bright future for you here if you want it." Those words meant more to me than he could know. Simple recognition of my abilities without qualification or comparison. Harrison became the father figure I had always craved, someone who valued me for exactly who I was. By 27, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest condo in Cambridge. It was nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath with a small balcony overlooking a quiet street. But it was mine, achieved without any financial help from my family. The day I got my keys, I stood alone in the empty living room and felt a sense of accomplishment that was bittersweet. I had no one to share this milestone with, no parents beaming with pride at their son's first home purchase. That changed when I met Grace at a tech conference in the city. She was working for a digital marketing firm and had come to the conference to network with potential clients. We struck up a conversation at the coffee station, and I was immediately drawn to her quick wit and genuine interest in my work. Unlike many people I met who glazed over when I talked about programming, Grace asked insightful questions and seemed fascinated by my explanations. Our first date stretched from coffee to dinner to a midnight walk along the Charles River. By our 3rd date, I knew this was different from any relationship I had experienced before. Grace saw me, truly saw me, and valued what she saw. As our relationship deepened over the next 2 years, Grace gradually learned about my family situation. She noticed how my mood would shift after phone calls with my parents, how I would become quiet and withdrawn. "Why do you keep trying so hard with them?" she asked one evening after I hung up from a particularly disappointing call where my parents had spent 20 minutes talking about Jacob's new job at a prestigious sporting goods company, a position they had helped him secure through connections. "They are my family," I replied simply, as if that explained everything. Grace took my hand. "Family should make you feel valued, not invisible." Her words struck a chord, but years of conditioning were hard to break. Part of me still believed that if I achieved enough, if I became successful enough, my parents would finally give me the recognition I craved. As my 30th birthday approached, I decided to visit my parents for the weekend. 30 felt significant, a real adult milestone, and something in me hoped this occasion might finally bridge the gap between us. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked as she helped me shop for gifts to bring to my family. I had chosen a fine bottle of scotch for my father, a silk scarf for my mother, and a signed jersey from Jacob's favorite baseball player that had cost me nearly $400. "I want to give them another chance," I said carefully, wrapping each present. "Maybe things will be different this time." Grace looked skeptical but supportive. "I will be right there with you," she promised, squeezing my hand. The week before my birthday, I received some exciting news at work. Harrison called me into his office and closed the door, a rare, serious expression on his face. "The executive team has been watching your progress, Ethan," he said. "We are creating a new division focused on artificial intelligence applications, and we want you to head it up. It comes with a substantial raise and a team of 15 reporting to you." I was momentarily speechless. This was a massive opportunity, the kind of recognition that validated all my hard work. "Thank you," I finally managed. "I do not know what to say." Harrison smiled. "Say yes. You have earned this, Ethan. Not many people your age would be ready for this responsibility, but you are exceptional." I left his office walking on air, immediately calling Grace to share the news. Her enthusiastic response was everything I needed, pure joy and pride without reservation. "We should celebrate," she exclaimed. "This is huge, Ethan." "Let us wait until after the birthday weekend," I suggested. "We can celebrate everything together when we get back." That Friday, we packed up the car and made the 3-hour drive to my parents' house in Connecticut. As the familiar neighborhood came into view, I felt the usual mix of hope and anxiety that accompanied these visits. "It will be fine," Grace reassured me, noticing my white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel. My parents greeted us warmly enough at the door. My mother hugged me briefly before giving Grace a more enthusiastic embrace. "You look lovely as always, Grace," she said. "The guest room is all made up for you two." My father clapped me on the shoulder. "Good to see you, son. The big 3-0, huh? Making me feel old." The evening passed pleasantly enough with small talk over dinner. I shared some details about work, carefully downplaying my promotion to avoid seeming like I was bragging. My parents nodded politely before steering the conversation to Jacob, who would be arriving the next day. "He is doing so well at play-action sports," my mother gushed. "His boss says he has a real eye for marketing athletics." I nodded and smiled, swallowing the familiar feeling of being an afterthought in my own family narrative. Grace squeezed my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support. That night, as we got ready for bed in the guest room, I allowed myself to feel optimistic. "See, it is going fine," I told Grace. "Tomorrow will be good." She kissed me gently. "Happy almost birthday, Ethan. I am so proud of you, even if they do not know how to show it." I fell asleep thinking about the next day, my actual birthday, holding on to hope that turning 30 might somehow reset our family dynamic, that this milestone might finally be the occasion where I felt truly seen by the people who had brought me into this world. I had no idea that instead it would be the day that would change everything. I woke up on my 30th birthday to sunlight streaming through the guest room curtains. For a moment, I just lay there, Grace still asleep beside me, and thought about the significance of the day. 30 years old, a third of a century, officially an adult by anyone's standards. Despite the complicated relationship with my parents, I felt a surge of optimism. Today would be different. Grace stirred beside me, opening her eyes and immediately breaking into a smile. "Happy birthday, Mr. 30, she said, leaning over to kiss me. She reached under the bed and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped package. "I was going to wait, but I want you to open this now, just between us." Inside was a vintage watch with a brown leather band. I recognized it immediately as the one I had admired months ago in an antique shop window, but had considered too extravagant to purchase for myself. "Grace, this is amazing," I said, genuinely moved. "How did you remember?" "I pay attention to what matters to you," she said, simply helping me fasten it on my wrist, "because you matter to me." Bolstered by this perfect start to the day, I headed downstairs with Grace. My mother was already in the kitchen cooking breakfast. "Happy birthday, honey," she said, giving me a quick side hug before returning to the stove. "I made your favorite pancakes." My father looked up from his newspaper at the dining table. "Happy birthday, son. Big day." It was a subdued greeting, but I appreciated it nonetheless. We sat down to breakfast, and I noticed my mother had made blueberry pancakes, which had been my favorite when I was 10. But for the past 20 years I had preferred plain pancakes with maple syrup. It was a small thing, but telling. Jacob knew what kind of pancakes I liked now. My parents did not. Still, I smiled and thanked her for the effort. The morning passed quietly. I received a few birthday calls from friends and coworkers, including Harrison, who once again congratulated me on my promotion and wished me a happy birthday. Around noon, the doorbell rang. Jacob had arrived. My younger brother bounded in with his usual energy, giving our parents enthusiastic hugs before turning to me. "Happy birthday, big bro," he said, giving me a brief hug. He nodded appreciatively at Grace. "Looking good as always, Grace. You are still way too good for my brother." It was said jokingly, but like many of Jacob's comments, it contained a subtle barb wrapped in humor. I let it slide, as I always did. My mother immediately began fussing over Jacob, asking about his drive and if he was hungry. "I saved some pancakes for you, your favorite chocolate chip." I noticed Grace giving me a look, having observed that my mother knew Jacob's pancake preference perfectly. The afternoon progressed with casual conversation mostly dominated by my parents, asking Jacob about his job, his friends, and the woman he had recently started dating. When the topic occasionally shifted to me, it was brief and surface level. "Work is good?" my father asked. "Really good, actually," I replied, seeing an opening. "I just got promoted to head a new division." "That is nice," he said, nodding vaguely, before turning back to Jacob. "Now tell me more about this marketing campaign you are working on." Grace squeezed my hand under the table again, her silent support keeping me grounded. As evening approached, my mother announced it was time for cake. She brought out a modest-sized chocolate cake with "Happy 30th, Ethan," written in somewhat hasty blue icing. It was noticeably smaller than the cake they had gotten for Jacob's 28th birthday 2 months earlier, which had been a elaborate two-tier creation from an expensive bakery. After a somewhat lackluster rendition of "Happy Birthday," my father cleared his throat. "We have something special for the occasion," he announced. My heart lifted. Perhaps they had put more thought into this birthday than I had given them credit for. My mother disappeared into the other room and returned carrying a large wrapped box. It was approximately the size of a laptop box, and I felt a surge of excitement. I had mentioned months ago that I was thinking about upgrading my personal laptop, which was now several years old. Had they actually been listening? "This is a big moment," my father continued. "Turning 30 is significant." I reached for the box, but to my confusion, my father held it back and instead turned toward Jacob. "Jacob," he said solemnly, "we want you to have this." A confused silence fell over the room. I stared at my father, certain I had misheard him. Jacob looked equally perplexed. "But it is Ethan's birthday," he said, glancing at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "We know," my mother chimed in, her voice taking on that slightly defensive tone she used when justifying questionable decisions. "But you have been working so hard and your laptop just broke last month. You need this for your job." "But Jacob began, but my father cut him off. "Ethan already has everything," he said firmly. "A good job, his own place, a nice girlfriend. You are still getting established. You need this more." Then he looked directly at me and delivered the words that would change everything. "You do not deserve anything. You already have everything." The room went completely silent. Grace's hand tightened around mine, so hard it almost hurt. Jacob looked uncomfortable but accepted the gift with a murmured thanks not meeting my eyes. I sat frozen, a polite smile somehow still fixed on my face, though I felt as if I had been slapped. 30 years of seeking approval, of hoping for recognition, of making excuses for their behavior, all of it crystallized in that moment into perfect clarity. This was not a misunderstanding or an oversight. This was who they were and who they had always been. "Thank you for the cake," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "It looks delicious." Grace shot me a concerned look, clearly alarmed by my calm reaction. She knew me well enough to recognize that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We ate cake. My parents continued talking mainly to Jacob about his plans. At one point, Jacob tried to steer the conversation back to my work, perhaps feeling guilty, but my mother quickly redirected to asking about his new girlfriend. Through it all, I maintained my composure, responding when spoken to, smiling at appropriate moments. But inside, something had broken, and something else, something stronger, was taking its place. Grace remained a steady presence beside me, occasionally answering questions directed at her but mostly watching me with concern. She could sense the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. As the evening wound down, my parents did not seem to notice anything amiss. My father turned on the television to check the baseball scores, and my mother began cleaning up the kitchen, declining Grace's offer to help. Jacob sat awkwardly for a while before announcing he was tired from the drive and heading up to his old bedroom. Before leaving, he paused beside me. "Hey, I did not know they were going to do that," he said quietly. "I can give you the laptop if you want." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. He was not a bad person. He had simply accepted the preferential treatment as normal because it had always been that way. "Keep it," I said evenly. "You heard them. I already have everything." He hesitated, then nodded, and went upstairs, the gift tucked under his arm. Later that night, as Grace and I lay in the guest bed, she finally broached the subject. "Ethan, what they did was cruel," she whispered, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "I cannot believe they would humiliate you like that on your birthday." I stared at the ceiling, feeling strangely calm. "It was actually a gift," I replied. Grace propped herself up on one elbow, looking at me with concern. "They showed me exactly who they are, and who they have always been," I explained. "No more hoping, no more making excuses, no more trying to earn love that should have been unconditional." "What are you going to do?" she asked. I turned to look at her, the person who had shown me what genuine love and support felt like. "We are leaving. Tonight." Grace's eyes widened, but she did not try to talk me out of it. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "I am with you. Whatever you decide." And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had found my real family. At 3 in the morning, the house was completely silent. Grace and I moved quietly, packing our bags in the darkness of the guest room. I had lain awake for hours, replaying the events of the evening in my mind, each mental repetition only strengthening my resolve. "Are you sure about this?" Grace whispered as she zipped her overnight bag. I nodded, my movements deliberate and certain. I have never been more sure of anything. After 30 years of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, of making excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, of hoping for recognition that never came, I was finally choosing myself. I scribbled a brief note on the hotel stationery that sat on the bedside table. "Thank you for the clarity your gift gave me yesterday. I will not be in contact for a while. Do not worry about me, Ethan." Short, direct, and without emotion, much like their relationship with me had been all these years. We crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the third step that had always creaked. The house was dark except for the dim light above the stove in the kitchen. I placed the note on the dining room table where they would find it in the morning. For a moment, I stood in the entryway of my childhood home, taking it in one last time. The family photos on the wall that documented a version of our lives that existed only in these carefully framed moments. The living room where I had opened so many birthday presents over the years, always with that mixture of hope and disappointment. The kitchen where conversations had always seemed to revolve around Jacob's achievements. Grace touched my arm gently. "Ready?" I nodded, picked up our bags, and walked out the front door without looking back. We loaded the car in silence, and I backed out of the driveway with my headlights off until we reached the main road. As we drove away in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a weight I had carried for so long that I had stopped noticing it. Once we were on the highway, Grace reached over and took my hand. "Talk to me," she said softly. The dam broke. All the emotions I had suppressed during the birthday disaster came flooding out. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway because I was crying too hard to drive safely. 30 years of seeking approval, of trying to be enough, of making myself smaller to avoid threatening Jacob's place in the family spotlight, all of it poured out of me in great heaving sobs. Grace simply held me, not trying to shush me or tell me it would be okay. She just witnessed my pain and validated it with her presence. When the storm finally passed, I felt emptied out but somehow lighter. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and took a deep breath. "I am not going back," I said, my voice hoarse but steady. "I know," Grace replied, "and I am here with you, whatever comes next." We drove until sunrise, stopping at a roadside diner for coffee and breakfast. As we sat in a booth watching the early morning lights spread across the parking lot, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. "What do you want to do?" Grace asked. "Go straight home." I considered the question. "Let us check into a hotel for tonight. I need a buffer day before going back to real life." We found a decent hotel in the next town and checked in. I called Harrison and told him I would be taking a personal day without going into details. He did not press for an explanation, just told me to take the time I needed. That day became a kind of limbo, a pause between my old life and whatever came next. Grace and I ordered room service, watched mindless television, and talked about everything except my family. It was exactly what I needed. A day without expectations, without performance, without trying to be worthy of anyone's approval. The following day we drove back to our condo in Boston. As we unpacked, I realized my parents had not called or texted to ask why we had left. It confirmed what I already knew. I was an afterthought, noticed only when convenient. The first week of silence was strange but liberating. I threw myself into work, focusing on the plans for the new AI division I would be heading. Harrison noticed something was different about me, a new intensity, a sharper focus. "Everything okay?" he asked after a particularly productive meeting where I had presented my vision for the division with confidence I had not known I possessed. "Getting there," I replied. "Just some family stuff." Harrison nodded, not pushing but letting me know he was available if I needed to talk. Family can be complicated. Just remember, Ethan, some of the most important family is the one you choose, not the one you are born into. His words resonated deeply, and later that week I asked if he had time for a drink after work. Over beers at a quiet bar near the office, I told him everything: the lifelong favoritism, the birthday betrayal, my silent departure. Harrison listened without interrupting, his experienced eyes taking in more than just my words. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know what I see when I look at you, Ethan," he finally said. "I see an exceptional young man who succeeded not because of his family's support but despite its absence. That takes a special kind of strength." He took a sip of his beer before continuing. "My father was an alcoholic who told me I would never amount to anything. Every success I have had in life has been partly driven by the desire to prove him wrong. But at some point I realized I was still giving him power over me. Real freedom came when I started succeeding for myself, not in spite of him." I considered his words carefully. How do you get to that point? Time, distance, building a life so full of people who genuinely care about you that the absence of those who should have becomes less painful. He signaled the bartender for another round. "And therapy. Lots of therapy." I laughed but took his advice seriously. The following week I found a therapist specializing in family trauma and booked an appointment. Dr. Melissa Sanders became another important piece in my rebuilding process. In our sessions, I began to unpack the complex emotions around my family, the anger, the hurt, but also the lingering love and hope that made the pain so acute. "What you are experiencing is grief," Dr. Sanders explained during one session. "You are mourning the parents you deserved but never had. That is a legitimate loss." Meanwhile, I was developing deeper connections with friends and colleagues. Marcus, a fellow developer who had become a close friend, invited Grace and me to dinner parties and weekend hiking trips. We spent time with Grace's family, who treated me with genuine warmth and interest. Her father, Alan, took particular pleasure in discussing technology with me, asking thoughtful questions about my work, and offering insights from his own career in engineering. With each passing week of no contact with my parents, I felt both stronger and more at peace. There were still difficult moments, coming across an old family photo while cleaning or holidays that triggered memories, but the sharp pain was gradually dulling to a manageable ache. Grace was my rock throughout this process. She celebrated my small victories, held me during the hard nights, and never once suggested I should reconcile with my parents out of some misplaced sense of obligation. "Family is earned, not given," she told me one evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset over the Boston skyline. "Your parents had 30 years to earn the privilege of being in your life, and they squandered it. That is on them, not you." With her support, Harrison's mentorship, and my growing circle of chosen family, I began to build a life defined by genuine connections, rather than the pursuit of approval I would never receive. For the first time, I was living for myself, not for the validation of others. and it felt like freedom. The 3 months following my 30th birthday marked a period of unprecedented growth in both my professional and personal life. With the weight of seeking parental approval lifted from my shoulders, I found myself approaching challenges with a new sense of confidence and clarity. At Tech Future, I threw myself into building the new AI division from the ground up. Harrison had given me considerable autonomy in selecting my team, and I carefully chose 15 talented individuals who shared my vision for creating ethical, innovative AI solutions. Rather than micromanaging, I established a collaborative environment where everyone felt empowered to contribute ideas. "You have got a natural leadership style I did not expect," Harrison remarked during one of our weekly check-ins. "People want to follow you because you actually listen to them." "I know what it feels like to be ignored," I replied simply. My approach yielded results. Within 2 months, our team had developed a prototype AI system for medical diagnostics that showed promising early results. When I presented the project to the executive team, the CEO, Valerie Mendez, was visibly impressed. "This is exactly the kind of innovation that will position us as industry leaders," she said. "Ethan, I would like you to present this at the National Tech Summit next month." The recognition felt good, but what felt even better was that I no longer desperately needed it. I appreciated the validation of my work, but my sense of self-worth no longer hinged on external approval. My relationship with Grace deepened during this time as well. One evening, as we walked along the Charles River at sunset, I found myself thinking about how she had stood by me through the family crisis, offering unwavering support without trying to fix me or rush my healing process. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "About how you showed me what real family looks like," I replied, stopping to face her. "About how you see me completely and love me anyway." I had not planned it, but in that moment I knew with absolute certainty what I wanted. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandfather's ring, the only family heirloom I had kept given to me by my grandmother before she passed away. "Grace," I said, "getting down on one knee, you have been my strength when I had none left. You have shown me what love without conditions feels like. Would you marry me and build a family with me, a real family based on respect and genuine care?" Her eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." That night, as we celebrated with champagne on our balcony, Grace asked the question I had been expecting. "Should we tell your parents about the engagement?" I considered the question carefully. "Not yet," I decided. "This is ours to celebrate with people who truly care about both of us." We shared the news with Grace's family first, who responded with genuine joy. Her father hugged me tightly and said, "We are gaining a son, not losing a daughter." It was exactly what I needed to hear. At work, Harrison opened a bottle of expensive scotch when I told him, "To new beginnings," he toasted, "and to building the life you deserve." Marcus insisted on throwing us an engagement party, inviting our circle of friends who had become increasingly important in my life. During the party, he pulled me aside. "I want you to know," he said, his voice slightly slurred from champagne, "but earnest, that I would be honored to be your best man, if you want that, I mean." His offer touched me deeply. "I would like that very much," I replied, realizing that I had indeed built a chosen family that was more supportive than my biological one had ever been. The engagement coincided with another professional breakthrough. The medical diagnostic AI project caught the attention of several major healthcare providers, and Tech Future secured 3 significant contracts as a result. Valerie called me into her office to deliver the news personally. "The board has taken notice of your division's success," she said. "We are increasing your budget for the next fiscal year and adding 10 more positions to your team." Along with this came a substantial raise in stock options that significantly improved my financial situation. Grace and I began looking for a larger home, something with room for the family we hoped to build together. We found a beautiful Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood with 4 bedrooms, a spacious yard, and a home office, perfect for remote work days. It was more than I had ever imagined owning, but now it was within reach. "This is the one," Grace said as we stood in the sun-filled living room after the realtor had stepped outside to take a call. I looked around at the space that could become our home, picturing future Christmases, birthdays, and ordinary days filled with the kind of warmth and acceptance I had always craved. Yes, I agreed. This is where we start our story. As we planned our wedding, the absence of my biological family became a practical consideration rather than just an emotional one. Traditional roles needed to be filled. Grace suggested asking her brother to walk me down the aisle, but it did not feel right. I think I will walk by myself, I decided. It represents my journey. She squeezed my hand in understanding. That is perfect. Harrison agreed to give a speech at the reception, taking on a role that would traditionally belong to my father. When I asked him, he was visibly moved. I would be honored, he said. Truly honored. The holiday season approached, the first I would spend without any contact with my parents. Grace's family insisted we join them for Thanksgiving, setting a place for me at the table as if I had always belonged there. Grace's mother, Diane, pulled me aside during the evening. I want you to know that you are family now, she said warmly, not just because of Grace, but because of who you are. Those words healed something in me that I had not realized was still broken. Christmas brought similar warmth, with Grace's family incorporating some of my childhood traditions into their celebrations. We hung the ornament I had made in first grade on their tree, and Grace's father insisted on making my favorite holiday cookies from a recipe I remembered from childhood. Through therapy, I was learning to separate the good memories from the pattern of neglect, allowing myself to cherish certain family traditions without the painful context. Dr. Sanders helped me understand that this selective preservation was not denial but healing. You can keep what serves you and leave behind what hurts you, she explained. That is not rewriting history, it is reclaiming your narrative. As the new year began, I found myself in a place I had never imagined possible just 6 months earlier. I had a fulfilling career with mentors who valued my contributions. I had friends who showed up consistently with genuine care. I had future in-laws who treated me as a son. And I had Grace, whose love had never been conditional on my achievements or status. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and accepted for exactly who I was. The irony was not lost on me. In losing the family that had never really seen me, I had found the belonging I had always sought. Still, in quiet moments, I sometimes wondered about my parents and Jacob. Had they reflected on what happened? Did they miss me at all? Those thoughts would come unbidden, and I would acknowledge them without judgment before returning my focus to the life I was building. I did not need their approval anymore, but some small part of me still hoped that someday they might finally see me clearly. Not because I needed it now, but because it would mean they had grown too. January gave way to February, and before I knew it, March was approaching, along with Jacob's birthday. It fell in the same week as mine, had a fact that had always seemed to underscore the disparity in how our milestones were celebrated. In previous years, I had dutifully sent a gift and called to wish him happy birthday, usually receiving a brief thanks in return. This year would be different. I had no plans to acknowledge the day, having maintained complete silence with my family for nearly 3 months. But as the date approached, I found myself occasionally thinking about childhood birthdays, when things had been simpler, before athletic talent and parental expectations had created such a divide between us. One evening, Grace found me in our home office, looking at old family photos I had stored in a box and rarely revisited. One picture in particular had caught my attention. Jacob and me, at ages 8 and 10, arms slung around each other's shoulders, gap-toothed grins directed at the camera as we stood beside a homemade fort in the backyard. "You okay?" Grace asked, softly placing a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, still looking at the photo. We were actually close once, before everything got so complicated. Grace sat beside me. "Do you miss him?" "Sometimes I miss who we were," I admitted. "Before he became the golden child and I became the afterthought." "Have you thought about reaching out just to him?" she suggested carefully. "Your issues are primarily with your parents. Jacob was a child too shaped by the same dysfunctional dynamic." I considered her words. There was truth in them. Jacob had not created the favoritism that had defined our childhood. He had simply benefited from it. "I am not ready," I finally said. "Maybe someday, but not yet." Grace nodded, respecting my boundary without pushing. Whatever you decide, I support you. Just remember that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for others." Meanwhile, unknown to me, preparations were underway for Jacob's birthday celebration at my parents' house. My mother had ordered an elaborate cake from the same expensive bakery they used every year. My father had purchased front-row tickets to a Major League Baseball game as Jacob's gift. They had invited extended family for a dinner party, presenting the perfect family image they had always maintained. During the celebration, as relatives asked about me, my parents gave vague answers about my busy work schedule. But Jacob, slightly drunk on expensive champagne, let something slip. "Did you know Ethan is heading a whole division now?" he said during dinner. "Creating some cutting-edge AI thing that got written up in Tech Monthly." My Aunt Margaret looked surprised. "How wonderful. You must be so proud." My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly realizing they knew nothing about this achievement. In fact, they realized with growing discomfort they knew nothing about my life at all anymore. "Of course we are proud," my mother said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. After the guests left, my father picked up his phone and called my number for the first time since I had walked out 3 months earlier. It went straight to voicemail. "Ethan, it is Dad. Just checking in. Give us a call when you can." The casual tone suggested nothing was amiss, as if I had simply been busy rather than completely absent from their lives for a quarter of a year. When I did not return the call, my mother tried the next day. Again voicemail. "Honey, we have not heard from you in a while. Is everything okay? Call us back." Their concern grew over the next few days as their calls remained unanswered. They began calling daily, leaving increasingly worried messages. They tried emailing. They even reached out to a few of my old college friends on social media, none of whom had current contact with me. Their mounting panic was driven less by genuine concern for my well-being, and more by the disruption to their narrative of perfect family harmony. My absence had created a hole in their story that they could not explain away, especially as relatives who had attended Jacob's birthday began asking more pointed questions about me. About a week after Jacob's birthday celebration, he called me directly. Unlike my parents, he seemed to grasp that something significant had happened. "Ethan, it is Jacob," his voicemail began. "Look, I know something went down after your birthday. Mom and Dad are freaking out because they cannot reach you. I am not taking their side or anything. I just want to know if you are okay. Call me, please." I listened to his message several times but did not return the call. I was not ready for that conversation yet. The calls from my parents increased in frequency and urgency. They called morning and night. They left tearful voicemails. They tried calling Grace, whose number they had, but who had blocked them at my request. By the end of the week, my father had left 29 voicemails, my mother 36, and Jacob 9. 74 missed calls in total, a number that would have seemed unimaginable 3 months earlier when days could pass without them reaching out to me at all. Jacob, meanwhile, was having his own reckoning. Our parents' panic had led to numerous conversations about what might have triggered my departure, and he had begun connecting dots that had always been there, but that he had never been motivated to examine. "Did something happen at Ethan's birthday?" he asked my mother, directly after she made yet another failed attempt to reach me. "Nothing unusual," she replied dismissively. "We had cake, we gave you that laptop you needed for work. Everything was fine, and then the next morning they were just gone." "You gave me a laptop on his birthday," Jacob repeated slowly, the inappropriateness of this finally registering. "What did you give him?" My mother looked uncomfortable. "Well, nothing specifically. He has a good job, he does not need things the way you do." "Jesus." Mom, Jacob said, the full picture becoming clearer. "Do you hear yourself?" For perhaps the first time, Jacob was seeing the family dynamic from my perspective, and he was not comfortable with what he discovered. That evening, he sent me a text message, rather than calling. "I just realized something that should have been obvious years ago. They have always treated us differently and not in a good way. I benefited from it, so I never questioned it. I should have. I am sorry, Ethan. Really sorry. Whatever you are doing, I hope you are happy. You deserve that." It was this message that finally broke through my silence. I was having dinner with Grace at our favorite restaurant when it came through, celebrating the successful launch of our AI diagnostic tool's second phase. "Everything okay?" Grace asked, noticing my expression as I read the text. I showed her the message. It is from Jacob. She read it carefully. That is, unexpected. Yeah, I agreed, genuinely surprised by my brother's insight. It is. Are you going to respond? She asked. I considered the question. Jacob's message suggested a level of self-awareness I had not expected from him. It was not an excuse for years of accepting preferential treatment, but it was an acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong in our family dynamic. Maybe I said finally, but not tonight. Tonight is about us and celebrating this launch. Grace smiled and raised her glass. To creating systems that actually work, both in technology and in life. As we clinked glasses, I realized that the missed calls and desperate messages from my parents no longer held power over me. I was not staying away to punish them or to make them miss me. I was staying away because I had finally found peace in their absence. Jacob's message, however, offered something different. Not a return to the old dynamic, but potentially the beginning of a new, more honest relationship. It was something to consider carefully on my own terms and in my own time. The next day I showed Jacob's text to Dr. Sanders during our therapy session. What do you want to do about this? She asked after reading it. Part of me wants to respond, I admitted, but I am afraid of getting pulled back into the old patterns. That is a valid concern, she acknowledged. But consider this. You are not the same person who left that house 3 months ago. You have done significant work on establishing boundaries and building self-worth independent of your family's validation. Perhaps the question is not whether you should respond, but how you can respond while maintaining the healthy boundaries you have established. Her perspective gave me a new way to think about the situation. I did not have to choose between complete estrangement and falling back into old patterns. There was a middle path, cautious, boundaried reconnection on my terms. That evening I composed a brief reply to Jacob. Thank you for the message. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge this. I am doing well, better than I have been in a long time. I would be open to talking at some point, just the two of us. His response came almost immediately. Name the time and place. I will be there. As I showed the exchange to Grace, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. This was uncharted territory, reconnecting with a family member but from a position of strength rather than need. Are you sure about this? Grace asked. No, I admitted, but I think it is worth trying. The decision to meet with Jacob was the first step in a process I could not yet fully envision, but for the first time I was approaching my family from a place of choice rather than obligation or desperation for approval. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, guided by the self-worth I had fought so hard to establish. And that made all the difference. A week later, I sat at a corner table in a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my home and my parents' house. I had arrived early, ordered a black coffee, and positioned myself facing the door. This meeting with Jacob was strictly between us. I had made that clear in my message setting up the meeting. When he walked in, I was struck by how nervous he looked, so different from the confident, borderline arrogant brother I had grown up with. He spotted me, gave an awkward wave, and ordered at the counter before joining me. Thanks for meeting me, he said, settling into the chair across from me. I was not sure you would. I almost did not, I admitted. But your text seemed sincere. Jacob nodded, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. It is. I have been doing a lot of thinking since you disappeared. At first I was just confused. Then Mom and Dad started freaking out, and things they were saying about your birthday did not add up. Like what I asked, curious about their perspective. They kept saying everything was normal, that they did not understand why you left. He shook his head. But when I pushed them on details like giving me your birthday gift, they got defensive. Dad kept saying you did not need anything, that you have always been self-sufficient. Like that justifies it somehow. I took a sip of my coffee, letting him continue. The thing is, Jacob said, looking genuinely troubled once I started thinking about it, I could see the pattern going all the way back. How they came to all my games but missed your science competitions. How they paid for my college but expected you to figure it out on scholarship. How every conversation somehow turns to me, even when you have something important happening. You noticed all that I asked, surprised by his level of insight. Not until you left, he admitted. It was like your absence finally let me see what had been happening all along, and my part in it. He looked directly at me then, his expression sincere. I benefited from their favoritism, Ethan. I did not create it, but I accepted it. I never stood up for you or questioned why they treated us so differently. That is on me, and I am truly sorry. His apology caught me off guard. In all my imagined scenarios of potential reconciliation, I had never pictured Jacob taking responsibility this way. I appreciate that, I said carefully. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge it. We talked for nearly 2 hours, unpacking decades of family dynamics with a honesty we had never managed before. Jacob shared his own insecurities, how he had always felt pressure to live up to our father's athletic dreams, how he had secretly envied my academic abilities and independence. They may have given me more stuff, he said, but they also controlled me more. You built your own life. I am still trying to figure out who I am outside of being their golden child. As our conversation wound down, Jacob hesitantly brought up the question I had been expecting. They want to see you, he said. Mom cries almost every day now. Dad tries to act tough, but he is a mess too. They know they messed up even if they cannot fully articulate how. I considered his words carefully. I am not ready for that yet, I finally said. And when or if I do see them, it will be with clear boundaries and expectations. Jacob nodded. That is fair. More than fair, actually. Before we parted, he asked about my life. Genuine questions about my work, my engagement to Grace, our new house. For perhaps the first time, I felt like he was truly interested in me as a person, not as a comparison point or competition. You seem really happy, he observed as we walked to the parking lot. I am, I replied. Happier than I have been in a long time. Good, he said simply. You deserve that. We parted with an awkward hug and a promise to stay in touch, a tentative first step toward a new kind of brotherhood, based on mutual respect rather than rivalry. Over the next month, Jacob and I exchanged occasional texts. He respected my boundaries and never pressured me about our parents, though he did keep me informed of their continued attempts to reach me. The missed calls had now exceeded 100, and my mother had started sending lengthy emails alternating between guilt trips and desperate pleas. After much discussion with Grace and several sessions with Dr. Sanders, I finally decided I was ready to meet with my parents. I would not do it at their house, surrounded by the physical reminders of childhood disappointments. Instead, I suggested a restaurant, public enough to discourage emotional outbursts but private enough for an honest conversation. Jacob offered to be there as a buffer, but I declined. This needs to be between them and me, I explained, but thank you. Grace, however, was non-negotiable. I want you there, I told her. You have seen the whole picture, the before and after, and frankly, I trust myself more when you are beside me. The evening of the meeting arrived. Grace and I got to the restaurant 30 minutes early, securing a corner table that offered some privacy. I felt surprisingly calm, centered in the knowledge that I was no longer seeking their approval or validation. I was here on my terms with clear boundaries and expectations. When they walked in, I was struck by how much older they looked after just 4 months. My mother's hair seemed grayer, my father's posture more stooped. They spotted us and hurried over my mother already tearing up. Ethan, she said, reaching for me, as if to hug me. I stood but maintained enough distance to make it clear I was not ready for that level of physical contact. She withdrew, her hands hurt flashing across her face. Thank you for meeting us, my father said, stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional tension. We all sat down, an awkward silence falling over the table. Grace squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder of her support. You have been ignoring our calls, my mother finally said, her tone accusatory despite her attempt to sound concerned. Yes, I replied simply. I needed space. Space from what my father asked, genuinely confused. What exactly did we do that was so terrible? You cut us off completely. His question confirmed what I had suspected. They truly did not understand the impact of their actions. Not just the birthday incident, but the lifetime of subtle, and not so subtle messages that I was less important, less worthy of their attention and affection. "Do you remember what you said when you gave Jacob my birthday gift?" I asked quietly. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We were just trying to help your brother," my mother said defensively. "His laptop had broken, and he needed one for work. You said, 'You do not deserve anything. You already have everything.'" I quoted my father's exact words. On my 30th birthday, after a lifetime of making me feel secondary to Jacob. "That is not fair," my father protested. "We have always been proud of you. You just never needed us the way Jacob did." "I did need you," I corrected him. "Every child needs their parents' approval and support. I just learned to stop asking for it because it was never forthcoming." What followed was perhaps the most honest conversation we had ever had as a family. I laid out example after example of the disparity in how they had treated Jacob and me, not with anger but with calm clarity. Grace occasionally added her observations as an outsider who had witnessed the dynamic firsthand. Initially, my parents were defensive, making excuses or claiming I was exaggerating, but as the evidence mounted, their defenses began to crumble. "We never meant to make you feel less loved," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We just thought you were more independent, that you did not need the same kind of attention." "Children should not have to earn their parents' attention," I replied. "It should be freely given." By the end of the dinner, my parents were beginning to grasp the magnitude of what had happened, not just on my birthday but throughout my life. They offered tearful apologies, promises to do better, pleas for another chance. "I need you to understand something," I told them, as the evening drew to a close. "I am not meeting with you tonight to pick up where we left off. I am not angry anymore, but trust has been broken. If you want a relationship with me moving forward, it will be a new one built on mutual respect and clear boundaries." They nodded, seemingly willing to accept any terms if it meant not losing me completely. "And one more thing," I added. "Grace and I are engaged. We are getting married in October. You are welcome to attend, but it will be as guests, not in traditional parental roles. Those honors will go to people who have consistently supported and valued me." My mother looked pained at this, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm before she could protest. "We understand," he said quietly, "and we would be grateful to be there in any capacity." As we parted ways in the parking lot, my mother asked hesitantly if she could hug me. I nodded, allowing a brief embrace that felt different from any we had shared before, less performative, more genuine in its tentative vulnerability. The months that followed brought slow, careful rebuilding. My parents made efforts I had never seen before, asking thoughtful questions about my work, remembering details about my life, acknowledging Grace as an important part of our family. They attended our engagement party, staying mostly in the background and making no attempt to claim spotlight moments. The wedding planning continued, with Harrison still giving the speech in my father's traditional role and Marcus standing as my best man. These choices remained non-negotiable, honoring the people who had been there for me when my biological family had not. On our wedding day, Grace was radiant in a simple but elegant gown. My parents sat in the third row, respectful of the boundaries I had established. When Harrison delivered his speech at the reception, there was a moment where I caught my father's eye across the room. There was sadness there, but also understanding, and perhaps a hint of pride untainted by comparison or expectation. Jacob stood to give an unexpected toast, his voice emotional as he addressed the gathering, to my brother, who taught me that true strength is not about athletic ability or career success, but about having the courage to demand the respect and love you deserve. Ethan, you have built a beautiful life with Grace, surrounded by people who truly see your worth. I am honored to be learning how to be one of those people. A year after the wedding, Grace gave birth to our son, whom we named Alexander. My parents visited the hospital, approaching tentatively aware of their precarious position in my life. When my mother asked if she could hold the baby, I nodded, watching as she cradled him with tears in her eyes. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "You are going to be an amazing father, Ethan." "I know," I replied with quiet confidence. I have learned exactly what to do by experiencing what not to do. It was not a barb intended to hurt her, simply a truth we both acknowledged. She nodded, understanding the implicit promise in my words, that the cycle of favoritism and conditional love would end with me. Now, 2 years after that fateful birthday, my relationship with my family has found a new equilibrium. It is not perfect and perhaps never will be. Old patterns occasionally resurface and require gentle but firm correction. But there is an honesty between us that never existed before, a willingness to acknowledge hurt rather than brush it aside in service of a false harmony. More importantly, I have built a life rich with genuine connection, with grace, with our son, with friends and mentors who value me for exactly who I am. The painful gift my parents gave me on my 30th birthday was the clarity to see what I truly deserved and the courage to walk away from anything less. If you are facing similar pain from family who cannot see your worth, remember that family is not just blood. It is the people who prove they deserve a place in your story. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who cannot love you properly, making space for those who can. And sometimes, though not always, that departure creates room for a new, healthier relationship to eventually grow. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family who could not see your worth? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of overcoming family trauma to build a life of authentic connection. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, you deserve to be valued not for what you achieve, but simply for who you are.